Hello, and welcome to this week's Ask an Atheist. My name is Ryan Dudley, and I am the State Policy Manager here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Today, we are going to discuss some of the latest findings from a study published by the PRRI, which is the Public Religion Research Institute, and the impact of Christian nationalist misinformation campaign on the support for transgender rights. As always, if you have questions about our topic today, you can drop them in the comments below or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Today, I'm joined by one of our attorneys, Kat Grant, who is a fellow here at FFRF through the Equal Justice Works. Hey, Kat.
Hello.
Before we jump into that topic, which is going to be really exciting, Kat has a lot of expertise on that, we want to go to our FFRF co-president, Dan Barker, who is joining us live from Santiago, Chile. How are you, Dan?
Hey, buenas tardes. Good. How you guys doing?
We're doing well.
We're good.
What takes you down to Chile?
Oh, so a lot of things. FFRF is co-sponsoring some events, and we have for many years in Latin America, where free thought is growing and strong. And I came down because we're co-sponsoring an event in Buenos Aires. But since we were going there, I thought, well, let's see what there might be in Uruguay. Turns out in Uruguay, just across the big Rio, there's a group of free thinkers. They call it the 20th of September group. They invited me to come speak to their group last Wednesday, and that was really exciting. A whole bunch of free thinkers and scientists and attorneys and others gathering together to compare our two countries, for one thing, and to learn a lot about how actually Uruguay is really a very free-thinking country. I was surprised. They're so free-thinking that not only did they disestablish the church, but they went in and they changed all their street names and all their plaza names to get rid of the religion, and now they're all totally secular. So it's pretty exciting.
So, Dan, you speak pretty fluent Spanish, right? How did that happen? How did you learn Spanish?
Well, I do. I speak about, I guess, 95%. In fact, I was the interpreter for the new editor of the Skeptical Inquirer from CSI, from that group, and Stephen Hupp, he came down and gave a good talk, and he didn't know Spanish, so I gave him about a 95% good translation, and I learned it when I was a missionary in Mexico many decades ago, and it's kind of fun because the Spanish I learned back then was all the church Spanish. I can say all these religious theological terms, and are you born again? But I still have a lot of trouble with a lot of the new science and philosophy and law and medicine, all those words that I never learned when I was a preacher. But that was fun. Afterwards, we went out and had a good dinner. They're real big on meat down there. I guess there's probably 6 or 7 vegetarians, but we had a good time talking, comparing notes about our countries. That was really exciting. And then I came over to Buenos Aires for this event called Jornadas de Pensamiento Crítico, Journeys in Critical Thinking, organized by Alejandro Borgo, who is an author and a journalist. And there was a lot of speakers and presenters in science and in alternative medicine and civil rights and flat earther, the whole bunch of stuff on pseudoscience. And I gave a talk about my new book that's coming out, which they wanted me to talk about, called Contradiction, which I'm hoping will be translated into Spanish. But that was a good time. I'm kneeling down in the middle, and next to me, and then I went on a tour of the city. Okay, there we are. Next to me on my right there is Marcos Telias, who's from Chile. He's the artist of my new book, Contradiction, which we'll see it at the convention this year. So it's fun to meet all these great people. Then I just sort of walked around the city. I walked 9 miles on Monday through the city. And this is the most beautiful bookstore in the world, according to a number of sources. It used to be an old theater, like an opera theater. And now it's a bookstore, and you might even call it a temple to reason. It was really exciting to spend time there. And then you can actually eat there on the former stage. Then I walked around, and then I saw, this is the pink building. That's the balcony up there where Evita gave her famous speech, don't cry for me, Argentina. A lot of history in Buenos Aires. But then after that, I came over here to Chile. And there's Marcos again. Marcos is a doctor. He's there on the right. Marcos is a doctor, a successful doctor in Chile. And then they gave me a tour of the city. We got up to see the big Virgin Mary statue that's on the hill above the town. And then some other, Daniel there on the other side, free thinkers. We just had a good time. We didn't have a formal meeting, but we just had a good time talking, sharing, the status of free thought in Latin America. So it's been a very productive tour.
Very cool. Dan, I'm going to jump off script quickly. You mentioned the 20th September is the group or the speech or the topic that you gave. What's the significance of that? It'll save me some Googling after this.
Well, from what I remember them telling me, it has to do with Italy. It has to do with Garibaldi in Italy, either disestablishing religion or I'm going to have to look it up myself. Spending one day in Uruguay didn't make me an expert in all things Uruguay. But, but their group is called that, and there's a big Italian influence in Uruguay. And so that goes back to some date involving Garibaldi and religion and making it a secular country. They're very proud in Uruguay that they are a secular country, although they have a strange accent. Kat, you and I would say Uruguayos for Uruguayan, but they say Uruguayos.
Interesting.
Instead of calle, they say calle. So it's a different accent the way they talk, but they're just beautiful people, and they're smart, and they're active, and they care, and they're proactive about keeping religion out of government.
Very cool. Well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Dan. I just knew it was going to be
that's okay.
a lingering question I had for after the show. But thank you very much. Yeah, right. So, well, thank you very much for all that information. And I know you're going to stay on in case we have audience questions for you. But thank you for the update and good luck over there. We really appreciate you stopping by. So now we're going to get back to the crux of our show. The PRRI recently released their American Values Atlas survey, which measures a detailed profile of the demographic, religious, and political characteristics of the LGBTQ Americans. This analysis also measures Americans' attitudes toward LGBTQ rights across all 50 states on three key policy issues: non-discrimination protections, religiously based service refusals, and same-sex marriage. The studies produced some really concerning results, namely that while support for LGBTQ plus individuals is still relatively high, there has been a drop in support among those three key policy issues that I mentioned before. That's why we have Kat here today. Kat is our resident expert on such issues like that. So Kat, can you help us understand, or can you help us attribute why the drop?
Yeah, so, this has really been a key issue area for us. That is a big part of why I have this fellowship. And I think there's a very clear correlation between this dip in support. And when we say a dip in support, it's really across these three issue areas, only like a 2-3 percentage point dip. But it is a dip, and I think it's something that we need to address. And anecdotally, I know you and I can speak to some of the pushback we've gotten from religiously unaffiliated folks on why we even talk about LGBT issues and why this comes up. But I think, looking at a very macro level, we can really attribute so much of this to the misinformation being funded by the big power players in the Christian nationalist movement. So back in December of 2023, so very recently, the Southern Poverty Law Center released an extensive report detailing the pseudoscience network behind the current misinformation campaign. In this report, they identified that much of this anti-trans science, and I'm using science with the largest air quotes possible here, comes from a network of organizations that include the Heritage Foundation, the Alliance Defending Freedom, and the deceptively named American College of Pediatricians, which was actually initially founded to push conversion therapy, the Family Research Council, and others. So what you're looking at right now is from that report, and that is a graph showing the levels of shared personnel between all of these groups. So we have two different graphs. This is sort of the overall. You can see that a lot of these groups have all of the same personnel. You can see that some of them are very specifically religious-based, such as the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Some of y'all who might be keeping up with election season and some of the risks to secular democracy might be a little alarmed to see Project 2025 up there. You see the Alliance Defending Freedom. these all are interconnected. There is no one singular group that is really leading the charge. They are working together, and we've known this for a long time. Madison Pauly over at Mother Jones put out a piece that I reference very frequently regarding the long-term, since at least 2017, emails that went between a lot of these organizations on banning gender-affirming care. So we know that this is a really, really strong network. And like I said, while many of these organizations are well-known Christian nationalist outfits like ADF, they don't immediately present themselves like that. So that leads a lot of other organizations to seem unrelated to the Christian nationalist movement. Those then get picked up by, people who believe themselves to be secular, to not ascribe to religious belief, taking on this very conservative Christian agenda regarding gender. This is really what sucks people into the anti-trans movement, even though it is being funded by all of these Christian nationalist groups, and this so-called science often is even being performed, being put together by these groups.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, and I loved, is that the right word? It was really interesting to see how interconnected everybody is. First of all, I didn't know there was a Christian Dental and Medical Association.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
Which is kind of absurd, but whatever the case may be. So this is like a scientific, social scientific study that you see. But how do you see this manifesting on the ground with your work as an Equal Justice Works Fellow and following these sorts of issues?
Yeah, so it manifests in a few ways. You and I both do a lot of legislative and policy work together. And so you've seen it, and I've seen it, and I think many of our viewers have seen it, where we're seeing a ton of anti-LGBT bills, specifically focused, you note that I talk a lot about trans issues, and while the PRRI study doesn't actually anywhere really say anything about trans people specifically, socially we associate transness with all of the other letters underneath the LGBT umbrella. So that dip correlates across to also same-sex marriage rights, employment protections, etc. But you see this really strong rhetoric happening in our state legislatures. People are calling trans people imps and demons and citing all of these studies that, again, I use studies with very, very large air quotes because the science is poor. I think a lot of this also ties into scientific literacy in the United States is not the best. I had to teach myself a lot of just basic scientific literacy because my high school education and my undergraduate general studies education did not really prepare me for the kind of literacy I now need to be able to evaluate these studies. So it does take a lot of self-work, unfortunately. That is a failure of our education system. So we see it on that front legislatively, and I'm sure you can talk as well about that. But we also see it, I encourage anyone who thinks, oh, this pushback doesn't exist, particularly when this gets posted on YouTube later, take a look at the comments. We have a great team who's very good at, moderating the more extreme, hate speech TM comments that we get, but we don't delete all of the comments just because we disagree with them. And you will see in the comments that we have people who say that they aren't religious, but ascribe to this concept of gender that doesn't have a basis in science, that, we know both from a scientific and historical perspective, trans people have always existed under different names, certainly, but we've always been around. So, you see that. So there's the pseudoscience, and then you also have these legal think tanks, these advocacy groups. They also have a very, very strong connection in terms of personnel. So you see that there, again, you see ADF, you see Project 2025, you see all of these different religious groups, you see the American Enterprise Institute. But again, you see a lot of them are deceptively named. So, I see the Women's Liberation Front, for example, is a group that follows what is called trans-exclusionary radical feminism, or TERF ideology, that tries to completely discount the idea that trans women are women, that say that trans women are taking opportunities from quote unquote real biological women, that letting trans kids play sports with their assigned gender is taking away scholarship opportunities. They co-opt feminism and they use feminism, and I'm not going to not call them feminists because I think we don't need to be engaging in no true Scotsman fallacy right here, but they use this type of, rhetoric. But then you saw just there, they have a ton of shared personnel with the Alliance Defending Freedom, which we encounter pretty much every day in our work here, whether that is from the legal advocacy side or within litigation or our amicus practice. We are always seeing them pop up. So this is where this is all coming into play. And again, like I said, people are getting sucked into it.
Yeah. And I will say one thing: if you don't know about Project 2025, please go look that up. I'm actually giving a talk on the Iowa Secular Summit on it in a month. It is probably the most terrifying, I don't know if you want to call it manifesto, that I've seen in such a long time. It's only 900 pages, so go read it for yourself. Take an evening.
Yeah, just a quick read.
Yeah, enjoy it. Yeah. So one thing that's really concerning to me with this study was one, the downturn in support for these three policy areas among the LGBTQ community, but more notably, who is or where the support is dropping, right? So I want to go ahead and point out a couple things that among the religiously unaffiliated, like we just kind of brought up, support has dropped simply 1%, but it's still dropped a little bit,
right?
From 2022 to 2023. Is there anything you can attribute that to? How are we seeing that? What is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think we are seeing a split amongst religiously unaffiliated folks. And I think this is a case where there is a very small but very loud minority that has taken this as an opportunity. I call it the anti-trans grift. There is a lot of money in being anti-trans. There is a lot of power and influence in taking this stance that, while its political popularity is dropping, is still fairly politically popular. So, there is this very loud contingent that is small, this 1% drop, for example, that promotes this idea of there are only two genders and it's, determined by your biological sex. And, one of the things we see a lot is this idea of being trans as a religion and promoting that. I see that phrase all the time, or the religion of woke, things like that, where because, and I'm trying to phrase this as charitably and compassionately as I can, there are people who think that rights are like pie, that political power, that political influence is like pie, and that if other people get pie, there will be less pie for them, and they really love pie. They want that pie, but it's not like pie. And I think it's very human. I don't think that it is necessarily some massive grand moral failing, but, it is a very human impulse. This is why we see religious people and why religion has always been corrupted by power, that is a very human impulse. And so I think that is really where we can attribute it to, where, also gender, the whole idea, I call it wibbly wobbly goo. It's complex. It's not something with an easy black and white answer. It's not something like, why does the sun go up? Why does the sun go down? Why is the sky blue? Why do plants usually have green leaves? These things that can be explained by very, very basic, scientific principles. People want easy answers, and I get that. But I think there are a lot of people who don't want to challenge that worldview and don't want to really think through, why do I think there are only two genders? What is that cultural influence? Because ultimately, that cultural influence, at least in the West, amongst, Western Christians in areas that are either European or have been colonized by Europeans, the answer is it comes from Christian colonialism. You see all of these pre-colonial societies that had much more rich, complex, understandings of gender. Those came in and were civilized by white people and their Christian understanding of gender. And I think that very much has transferred onto a very loud contingent of predominantly white, I won't say exclusively white men, but predominantly white men, atheists in our space that are trying to civilize people with reason. And I'm using very big air quotes here. I know this is not going to be a popular take amongst this very loud contingent, but because, again, it's not something that can be seen. It's not something, there's no blood test for trans. Mm-hmm. It's hard to grasp, and it also takes a lot of letting go of your own ego, which no human likes to do.
Right. So kind of another anomaly that I saw in this study is that the age demographic, 18 to 29-year-olds, has seen a drop from 2022. Actually, this is 2015, I'm sorry. From 2015 to 2023, 80 to 76%. So about a 4% drop in support for these three policy issue areas that I had discussed, the discrimination and but the three policy issues I addressed. Conversely, 65 plus has gone up, support has gone up.
Yes.
And I did not copy the numbers down here, but it was actually quite significant on the graph.
Yes.
Do you have any comments on that?
I think that's really, really interesting. I think some of it is younger people we're starting to really come into our own. I'm kind of including myself in that younger people. I'm probably at that older end of, I'm 27, I'm at that weird cusp between millennial and Gen Z, but really starting to understand what it is to have political power, what it is to have a voice, and younger people do tend to take more extreme positions in either direction. So I think that plays into it a little bit. Amongst older people, I do think that, support is going up because so much of it is getting normalized, first of all. I think, especially when you think more broadly about LGBT issues and not just trans issues specifically, they've had time to look at, what's happened post the Obergefell decision, which legalized same-sex marriage. Right. The world didn't implode, and I think a lot of them also, younger people there is a higher rate of queer folks amongst younger people and LGBT folks amongst younger people. And so I think that plays into it that their grandkids and, their kids, grandkids, etc., they're seeing more people who are able to come out earlier that are in their lives and that they care about. So I think just, I have no evidence, no numbers to back this up. But if I were to make a guess, that is a significant part of it. I think younger people, we will see that sort of amongst the people that were studied, I think that demographic and that age group, as they get older, that number will start to go up again as people don't feel the need to be the most extreme voice in the room and see the world more complexly.
Yeah, very interesting take on that. I just found that the numbers were just shocking to me. I'm happy to see that, the older generation. I don't think I'm in the oldest generation yet.
I think you're in the middle.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in the middle.
Good
still,
job.
so thank you. But so I guess, as you mentioned earlier, I do a lot of policy, legislative stuff, and I've seen a lot of anti-trans legislation come across my desk, so to speak, right? So how do you think that legislation, do you think that that's driving public policy?
Yes.
Or public opinion, I'm sorry?
Yes, I 100% think so. Because one of the things you see is that, I meant to go look at the spreadsheet that Aaron Reed and co. keep tracking all of this anti-LGBT legislation. But one of the things you'll see, even though the amount of bills that are being introduced is expanding exponentially, when you look at the percentage that actually get passed, it's actually very, very low. Now, the ones that do get passed are still bad. I'm not discounting that. But the amount that get passed are very low. And so really, to me, what that is political signaling. It's virtue signaling that, hello, I am a person in power. This is what I believe about this group of people. I believe that they are a danger to children. I believe that they are mentally ill. I believe, again, I forget which legislative session I'm quoting here, but I believe they are imps and devils. Like, that quote is not a joke. That is what someone said. That is what a lawmaker said about trans people. But, you see that signaling, and people look to the people in power as, moral leaders. It's sort of a subconscious thing there of, oh, this is a threat. I think a lot of people never thought about trans issues until they started being brought up in legislative spaces. I think a lot of people, I say this all the time. You have shared a bathroom with a trans person. I promise you, you have shared a bathroom with a trans person. You have shared a locker room with a trans person. Your kids have probably shared a bathroom and a locker room with a trans person. You don't know this because no one is going around looking at each other's genitals in a locker room. I don't think that that's a controversial statement to say. People didn't think about it because it just wasn't in the public consciousness. But as support for homosexuality, same-sex relationships, all of that has gone up. The Christian nationalist movement needed a new boogeyman. And trans people, because we're a very small minority, gender is complicated. The idea that something that is seemingly very simple might be more complicated than it actually is scares people. The unknown scares people. That is why we have become such a massive political target. And so then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, the transes are coming to trans my children and assault my children. And, you see all these things about, well, women are going to be assaulted by trans women in the bathroom because they're biological males. And that doesn't happen. Trans women are actually more likely to be assaulted in the restroom than the other way around. And it's because these bills are being introduced to solve problems that don't exist, so people think there is a problem.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I'm looking here at my notes right now where it's like Florida and Texas have pushed efforts to compile data on trans citizens. Donald Trump has called for trans healthcare, a ban on trans healthcare for minors and severe restrictions for adults. Whatever you think of these they're out there, right? Like,
yeah.
They're now in the public conscience, and they're out there, and they're shaping public opinion, clearly. But I want to leave it kind of on a high note, and this discussion on a high note, just because while these numbers are somewhat disconcerting, and they hurt a little bit to see a drop, especially among the younger and the religiously unaffiliated, the ones who we kind of connect with the most. The numbers are still pretty high across these three public policy issues, right? Like for the LGBTQ community, people just generally don't think that they should be discriminated against. They take that hard, very controversial stance that people just shouldn't be discriminated against.
Yeah, we saw the 303 creative decision was incredibly unpopular, even amongst people who don't think about state-church separation, who don't think about religious discrimination that much.
Can you remind us of the 303?
Yes, thank you. The 303 creative decision was from last summer, the wedding website designer case in which the Supreme Court ruled it was framed as a free speech issue and ruled that Colorado's anti-discrimination provisions could not be held against this woman who did not want to make a hypothetical wedding website for a hypothetical same-sex couple. We have done an episode of Ask an Atheist on that. You can go back and watch that in the archives. Patrick Elliott, Liz Cavell, and I yelled about that for a solid probably hour last summer. So you can hear all about that there. Yeah,
my favorite part of those facts, it was a web designer from California.
Colorado.
The made-up couple. This individual was like a made-up couple, same-sex couple. He was a web designer apparently from California, wanted a web design by her in Colorado. It was just like this unbelievably made up.
And then they reached out to the person that hypothetically maybe inquired about maybe getting a website, and he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. What?
Yeah. This is a show about how corrupt the Supreme Court is. We can do that. Yeah, so we could talk about the Supreme Court and their
Yes.
their approach to things all day. But this is about the PRRI. So I want to go back and kind of look a little bit about this data here. And can we explain this graph a little bit? Do you know this one?
I did not. You put this in. I did not have a chance to look at this graph. So.
Okay. So this. Okay. So this graph is what I'm being told is that it shows people here in our home state of Wisconsin. More than half of them never go to church. Actually, I'm kind of having a hard time reading that.
Oh, I can actually
seldom or
read
never,
it now. Yes. So seldom or never
underlies.
is, I believe, 53%. Other, once or twice a month, 26, and once a week or more, 22%.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's just like a small little slice of kind of shows you what the PRRI study does, people here in Wisconsin. I'm surprised that half of them
Yeah.
go to church. Is that?
It's
How are you interpreting?
Half of them don't go to church.
But the other half do.
It seems like it,
Yeah,
or at least
so
say
which
they
is
do.
surprising. Yeah.
PRRI is a great resource.
They are.
We use it all the time across all of our teams on the legal floor. Intake uses it. Legislation uses it. Or I guess policy uses it.
Yeah.
Litigation uses it. We use their information all of the time. It is an incredible resource for so many different topics, not just LGBT issues. So if you're looking for really good, really well-constructed data, I really, really recommend using PRRI as a resource.
Yeah, and one of the researchers at PRRI was actually speaking at our convention last year.
Yes.
And I believe we do have another image on the screen. Our TV went out right here, but I think it's the Southern Poverty Law
Yes.
Center.
They put out this great report, and actually those images that you saw earlier, you can actually physically manipulate them on your screen if you go to that report through the Southern Poverty Law Center website and look at, how are these all connected? They have a bunch of like networking graphs and stuff like that. It is an incredibly, incredibly well done piece of research that has also been incredibly helpful for my work and for the rest of the team as we're approaching all of these issues.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to move to audience questions.
We are. So if you have your questions, please submit them if you have not already done so. Otherwise, I will try to get back to the screen that has these questions because it just changed screens. And I got it. I can
job,
handle
Duds.
it. Yeah. Right. Man, I'm really showing the age that I'm not in the younger demographic anymore. But so we're going to go ahead and we do have a few audience questions here that I'd like to get to. So the first one is talking about media literacy. I think it kind of is in that realm. Are there media outlets specifically focused on defeating the misinformation campaign facing the trans community? If so, who are they? And are there ways to let them to help them out and fight back against the wave of disinformation?
Yeah, so I am always sending people to Erin Reed's work. Erin Reed has done so much incredible work. She does all of this tracking. She is a freelance journalist who has a Substack, and that is her whole job, is keeping on top of this. We would not be able to do our job without the work of Erin Reed. She puts out a legislative risk map. Almost every day is debunking things like the Cass report, which was this really awfully, terribly designed report that, took away, for example, all data regarding gender-affirming care for kids that wasn't double-blinded, but you can't actually have a double-blinded gender-affirming care study because you can't have a placebo control group. That's not how that works. Or, they used they wanted a level of like lack of regret it was a standard that was way higher than any other medical procedure to like prove gender affirming care doesn't actually work, that it's bad, just really poorly conceived data, or recent data that showed that gender affirming care doesn't lower suicide rates, recontextualizing that and saying, no, this is being misinterpreted. So I always send people to Erin Reed. Evan Urquhart is another great freelance journalist who does a lot of work. I also really recommend the work of Madison Pauly over at Mother Jones. I mentioned her recently. She recently just put out a piece on conversion therapy and reparative therapy and what is now kind of being reframed as gender exploration therapy, which is meant to basically convince someone that they are anything except trans. You know, it's very deceptively named. They're really good at naming things deceptively, and I think that makes things, especially in media literacy, very, very difficult. But yes, that is a very small number. I will also say, if you go to Free Thought Today, I fairly regularly put out blogs going through some of this misinformation and discussing these issues. So that is one other option. But yeah, there are a lot of sources that are doing the work to debunk and like really contextualize all of this misinformation that's being thrown around.
Yeah, I'll double down on the Erin Reed follow. She's both a great resource for trans anti-trans legislation and a great causer of my stress, because if I miss a bill and Erin has like 5 bills that she tracked that I completely missed, she's an amazing resource there. So recommend her for sure. So Kat, here's another question. Earlier you had mentioned that you had to teach yourself certain scientific literary skills due to the American education system. And this one actually Dan might be able to answer, or at least chime in on if he's still there. Do you think, or do you know if the LGBTQ plus community is facing similar challenges in other areas of the world? Is there this disinformation in other areas of the world?
Yes. So this is a huge issue globally. Europe is facing these massive challenges. I would say the UK is actually worse right now in terms of anti-trans rhetoric than the United States. It is jokingly sometimes referred to as TERF Island amongst some of us in the trans community. But you also see this in Uganda, for example. There was a very, very, very just horrific anti-homosexuality bill that was passed, you know, against international outcry. You see it really all over the world, this idea that, you know, homosexuality, you know, you still see this idea homosexuality causes AIDS, even though that has been debunked forever. You know, that was obviously a huge part of the rhetoric during the bulk of the AIDS crisis, but we now know that, and it's part of mainstream thought now, that it doesn't cause AIDS. Right. But this idea that it's the, you know, God's punishment for homosexuality is still very prevalent. You see a lot of rhetoric come out of the institution of the Catholic Church, for example, that's like, you know, if you give condoms to people, that's going to cause a spread of HIV and AIDS because it's just going to encourage same-sex relations. We know that this is not true. You know, you see trans people being characterized as immoral, as dangerous, as pedophiles all across the world right now, and this is only ramping up as this becomes more and more and more prevalent. And actually you see in a lot of countries that I don't like the third world distinction, but we don't have time to get into that. So I'll say countries that we consider to be underdeveloped or third world, you see that a lot of these organizations like ADF, the Heritage Foundation, et cetera, you know, there has been research done that they are funneling money, and Christian missionary groups are funneling money into these non-American countries so that they can essentially do a practice run on the types of policies that they want to implement in the United States. So it's incredibly important that we pay attention to not only what is happening in the United States, but what is happening globally in terms of LGBT rights. While things are getting better, they are still very much in flux and very, very fragile. And there are a ton of places in the world, including parts of the United States, that are very, very, very dangerous for anyone under the LGBT umbrella to exist within.
Yeah, and going back to Erin Reed, she has a really good map
yes.
of where to travel and where to not travel.
Yes.
Right? So a couple more questions. I think this one will be kind of quick and to the point, but how concerned should we be about this really, it's kind of almost a negligible dip, right? A 2 to 3% dip in support for these rights? Is it something we should be concerned about? Is it something where we should look to the broader picture? Where do we fall?
I think we shouldn't panic. Don't panic. Panicking, bad. That never helps anything. But I think we should be aware of it. And in terms of concern, one of the ways I've been kind of thinking about it is we never want to think that we are smarter than we are. Because if you think that you are too smart to fall for this Christian nationalist rhetoric, that if you think that you are too smart to, not get sucked into this vortex, you are going to get sucked into this vortex. You always want to be critical, you want to be aware, you want to be alert, even when the information you are getting, confirms whatever pre-existing bias you have. Really dig into who is funding that information, who is giving you that information. So I think that's why I wanted to address these findings today, is that I don't think we should panic. I don't think that it is necessarily a major trend in this space, but I think it's something we should be aware of so that we can stop it before it does become a major trend if there is any risk. It's very much a harm reduction strategy. Yeah. So I think being aware of it is important, but no reason to panic.
Got it. Okay. Solid advice. So going to you once more for advice. This will be the last question I think we have, but I think it's a good one to end on. So what is the best way that you would say, how do you confront a family or friend who has kind of fallen trap into believing something that ADF has put out or this misinformation campaign? How do you address family members and friends who have potentially fallen into this?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things you can do, and I know it is very, very hard, but it is to approach it from a place of compassion and love and saying, hey, I know this is not you. I know that you are someone who cares about people, especially I think about myself as a trans person. I have been very, very lucky in that I have a wonderfully accepting family. Even when they don't fully understand, they try very, very hard. And I know I'm very much in the minority in that regard. But I think about the conversations I have with people that I love and that I care about and saying, I know this isn't you. Let's talk about it. Why do you think this? What is the evidence for this? And walk through, okay, but here is this information that says otherwise. And here are the reasons why, just for example, this idea of there is low quality evidence for gender affirming care. The term low quality evidence is a term of art. It is a technical term. It's not that it is bad evidence. It is that you can't do a double-blind study on gender-affirming care. And taking the time to not condescend, to not, be rude or hateful, but to really walk through with that person why they might have been sucked into something that is incorrect or unscientific. Another route, especially if you don't necessarily feel like you have the scientific literacy, if you don't have the confidence to walk through some of this very difficult technical stuff, is to introduce them, to, the stories of trans people, to, show them the people who are doing this pro-LGBT work, show them the trans people whose lives are being affected by this. And, I think because people don't know us, because a lot of people maybe only know one or no trans people. I know a ton of people who I'm the first trans person they have ever met. Sure. They forget that we're human, that we are human beings, and you don't have to understand all the science. You don't have to understand the goo that is gender. You just have to understand that we're people trying to live our lives. That we're your neighbors, your friends, your baristas, your lawyers, your doctors, your, insert profession here. We're just living our lives. We're not some scary, mob looking to destroy the order of humanity. We're just trying to exist and not be hurt.
Right.
And I think really introducing that element of human compassion, because I very, very, very firmly believe that people are good, that people care about other people. They just get scared. And I think the more we can introduce just the narrative of trans people are just trying to live our lives and that we're people is also incredibly effective for kind of breaking people out of this panic thought spiral that this pseudoscience network is trying to get people into.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And what I'm gathering from that is kind of combating the boogeyman narrative. So really, thank you so much for that. Thank you for letting me be a part of this,
course.
this show. I really value and appreciate your insight on this.
I value and appreciate everything that you do. For those who don't know, Ryan and I have neighboring offices, so there's a lot of yelling in between our offices.
Yep.
So really, we are so lucky to have Ryan doing this policy work and keeping on top of not just LGBT issues, but state policy issues across the board.
Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. And I wish we had more time to discuss all these issues. They are very important. But that does conclude this week's Ask an Atheist. Don't forget, we also have a weekly broadcast TV show, Free Thought Matters. This week is the final episode of Free Thought Matters for the season. The program follows FFRF co-president Dan Barker to Oxford, England, to take part in a debate over whether God is a delusional belief. Here's a preview.
The Oxford Union compound was just a short walk from my hotel, through streets that have existed for centuries. After a celebratory dinner with my co-presenters, it was time for the debate.
And with that, all that's left is to put the motion before the House. So I move that this House believes that God is a delusion.
You can see Free Thought Matters on TV stations all across the U.S. and also on FFRF's Facebook and YouTube channels.
And don't miss Free Thought Radio. This week, Annie Laurie Gaylor speaks with FFRF Deputy Legal Director Liz Cavell about the upcoming Supreme Court decision on the abortion drug mifepristone. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio. And check out the latest episode of the We Dissent podcast. The latest episode explains the abortion pill case, how it got to the Supreme Court, and what we learned from the recent oral arguments. Listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you listen to podcasts, or check us out online at we-dissent.org.
If you want more information about the Freedom From Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you. If not, please join us, and we'll see you at next week's FFRF Ask an Atheist.